Growing gourmet herbs in Kentucky. So what is an herb? An herb is a plant or part of a plant that we value for its medicinal, savory, or even aromatic qualities. It's not necessarily just for us to consume it. Herbs can be traced back to the ancient Egyptians and Chinese times. There are references in the Bible that show herbs that were valuable as even tax payments. Documents from the medieval monasteries show herbs were used by most households, including the wealthy lords and monks. And herbs were the first air fresheners, deodorants, and flavor enhancers to come about back at a time when there wasn't really a lot of things out there to actually enhance flavors of foods. So I grow herbs. Well, they're easy to grow, and you get those fresh herbs, maybe the aromatic foliage or the green foliage, the scented flowers, the savory leaves that add spices to dishes, those kinds of things. Also, you can tuck them into your existing flower beds. You can grow them in gardens. You can grow them in containers. And the biggest thing is they're also very easy to grow. They have very few pests and fungal problems. And as you know, if you've purchased fresh herbs, they're quite expensive to purchase. As far as culture for herbs, most of them do want full sun. They also want well-drained soil. Remember, most of these are from the Mediterranean regions. Fertilizer also is generally unnecessary or very lightly needed because they are native to what is considered pretty poor soils. And also minimum watering once they are established. Again, remember, these are generally Mediterranean area plants and they grow in rocky soils and some of them are even from hot climates. There are a few types of herbs, just like there are in regular plants or any other plant. You can get annual herbs, you can get perennial herbs, and you can get biennial herbs. All this just depends on the type of herb that it is, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. As far as the annuals, they produce foliage, flowers, and seed in one growing season, and they die. Um, an example of this would be cilantro. They also will produce seeds that will survive the winter or some of them will, if you do let them seed enough in that area and you leave it an area there where they can germinate come spring. For others, the seed must be saved and purchased every year. The best annual herbs to start from seed, we have basil, borage, calendula, annual chamomile, cilantro, rosemary, summer savory, and marjoram. The rosemary is pretty slow to grow though, so a lot of people, that one's going to be so slow growing for home growth from seed that you're probably going to want to buy a plant because it takes several years to get a nice sized rosemary plant. And then we'll call these annuals because they die. They either die from freezes or they die from completing their life cycle. Rosemary would be an example of one that would freeze out if you left it outside. And cilantro is an example of one that would just complete its life cycle and seed. And so would basil and the others here. Some perennial herbs. Most of our culinary herbs are actually perennials. Herbaceous perennials die back over winter and return in the spring. And then woody perennials have stems that survive and continue to grow from year to year. An example of the woody one is in the picture here, and that's lavender. Some perennial herbs that you might want to start from seed is chamomile, catnip, chives, lavender, lemon balm, sage, salad burnet, and winter savory. Most of these are really nice plants. Lemon balm can get a little out of hand, but they're all nice plants. And many of these, if you let them flower, are actually really pretty. So they're kind of a nice plant to even add to a perennial border. If you want to grow herbs from seed, most of them can be successfully grown from seed, but um, they can be very inexpensive to grow from seed, whereas buying the plants, they're very expensive. You can read the package for instructions, such as your planting depth and those types of things. And also, you just need to have some basic knowledge on starting seeds. Uh, just use a good seed starting soil mix. Don't cover the seed too deeply. General rule is about 2 to 3 times the depth or the width of the seed. You can also cover the container with plastic or put a plastic bag on it to help in germination. But be sure that you do remove that once germinated. Also, if you do put the plastic over the container, make sure you don't let it get direct sun because it'll get too hot and can burn your seedlings and kill them before they even make it out of the soil. Once they're germinated, you don't want to overwater. Allow the surface of the soil to dry out between waterings. and then just place them in a warm area. That's generally about at least 70 degrees for most of these plants, and then just try to give them as much light as possible from that point on. Herbs also grow really well in containers. Make sure that you get adequate drainage. That's why I like clay pots for these because they drain quicker and they'll dry out quicker, especially if you've overwatered or you use a soil mix maybe that holds more water. Again, with the soil mix, make sure you have a good, well draining soil mix. I don't know that they sell particular soil mix is just for herbs, but if you get one of those types that's really light and loose and doesn't compact down for your containers, it'll be a good one for herbs. You can also use a slow release fertilizer, even though these are not heavy feeders. Slow release would be good because it'll give them a little bit of feed, but not you don't have a chance of overfeeding them and killing the plants. Uh, some of the seeds or the soil mixes that you can buy already have a little bit of slow release fertilizer in them, so you wouldn't want to add more if you bought that variety. Um, Also, with the clay pots, they do forgive you if you overwater, but the one problem with them also is they dry out quicker. So make sure if you're not going to be home or if you're not going to go be there to water a lot, then make sure you have somebody to help you out, or maybe use a plastic container and just make sure you don't overwater when you water. If you're growing herbs in the garden, in poorer soils, you may want to use some amendments, such as compost, just to improve your drainage and fertility. You don't have to add a lot to that, but it'll help loosen it up. If you're using raised beds, it's highly encouraged for heavy clay soils because of the overwintering of some of these perennials, they may just get too wet and not make it through the winter. Do want to use mulches. 2 to 4 inches is good. That'll help reduce your watering frequency, also reduce your competition from weeds, and also reduce your freezing and thawing, which will reduce the heaving of the plants out of the soil in the winter. Some plants, such as the mints, can overrun a garden in a short order, so make sure that you have a plan for those if you are planting mints. And generally, they'll need irrigation of about 1 inch of water per week. When cooking with fresh herbs, you do want to use the freshest ones possible. The aromatic essential oils evaporate readily, so it is just best to grow your own herbs or buy the freshest you can find and cut up or grind them in small amounts as needed. So if you're using fresh or dried, when you substitute fresh herbs in a recipe, just remember that 3 teaspoons is 1 tablespoon of fresh herbs, and that's equal to 1 teaspoon of dried or crushed herbs. So when they're dried or crushed, they're much more intense, and you have to use much less of it. 1 teaspoon of dried crushed herbs is equal to a quarter teaspoon of powdered herbs. As far as adding the culinary herbs to your dishes, powdered herbs and spices flavor is released immediately, so you want to wait until your dish is about 15 minutes of being done before adding them. If you're using whole spices, you should add those when you first put on a dish to cook so that they will have time to flavor the dish fully and getting extracted during the simmering process. Herbs also make a great salt substitute. They not only can help you decrease your salt intake and lower your blood pressure, but they will also add a flair to the taste of certain dishes to give them a one-of-a-kind flavor. Some examples of salt substitutes in common beverages or foods are tomato juice. You can use dill, oregano, tarragon, or lemon or lime juice to help add a little bit of it, maybe of a salt flavor to those. With cottage cheese, you can try chives or sage. And with eggs, you can use basil, dillweed, rosemary, or thyme. Those are just a few examples of herbs that might add a little bit of that zing or a little more of that salt flavoring and help enhance the flavor of those products. Then we're going to talk about some of our basic herbs. This is basil. It is an annual. It grows about 24 to 36 inches tall. It's an annual with broad, dark green or purple leaves. There's ruffled and flat leaf types as well. They produce small white flowers on spikes in midsummer. There's several varieties of basil out there that we can grow here in Kentucky. The sweet basil, which is the common type, which is the Italian type that we usually eat around here, or we know of it more than the other types. There's also cinnamon basil, which is popular in Asian cuisines. It has a somewhat cinnamon flavor. Also, it smells kind of cinnamony. It's not too, but it is not too distinct. The plant is beautiful with purple stems and glossy green leaves. It is really a very ornamental plant, so it really looks nice in some of our annual beds. Lemon basil has a very lemony flavor and aroma, and it can be used in cooking when you want to add a lemon flavor and maybe a little bit of basil flavor as well to a dish. Basil is quite aromatic. The flavor is somewhat reminiscent of mint, cloves, and maybe even a little bit of licorice mixed in there. You can use those to perk up any of your vegetable, poultry, or meat dishes. And then you can use those in tomato and egg dishes as well, in stews, soups, and salads. It is also a principal ingredient of pesto. If you don't know what pesto is, it's a green sauce that is added to soups, vegetables, and fish, and to pasta and Mediterranean cooking. Pesto basically is ground basil leaves with some olive oil, maybe a little pine nuts and garlic and salt and pepper, and maybe even a little Parmesan. And you add that to pasta, it's really good too. As far as culture for basil, you want to sow the seed in spring as soon as the ground can be worked. Or you can just start with transplants from a garden center or start your own. You want to set these out after all danger of frost is past, and just space the mature plants 8 to 12 inches apart. For fresh use, you want to harvest the leaves 6 inches or 6 weeks, I'm sorry, after planting or as the leaves mature. And then to keep a steady supply of new leaves, pinch off the flower spikes. That way you make sure you get new growth, and then you can keep getting new basil that way. Also, you may want to do a later planting just to make sure that you have fresh basil all the way through the growing season. Around the chives, this is a perennial. It's about 8 to 12 inches tall. Um, it is in the onion family or Alliaceae. The small bulbous plants grow in clumps 6 to 8 inches tall. They produce narrow, hollow, somewhat grass-like leaves in late May to June, and the plants produce small, round, attractive lavender pink flowers. It's another one of these that's really pretty, and it can add a lot of flair to a perennial bed, and then you also get the benefit of actually getting to eat the chives. They do add a mild onion-like flavor to your dips, spreads, soups, salads, almonds, casseroles, and most other vegetables. The flowers can be used for fresh in salads and vinegars as well, or you can dry it, and then you can add these to potpourris and wreaths, or you can dry the leaves and eat those later in the season as well. You can start chives from bulbs similar to onion sets or from seed. You can divide the clumps in early spring, keeping 4 to 6 bulblets for each new start. It's best to divide the old clumps every 2 to 3 years to prevent overcrowding. That can happen pretty quickly with these, and also if you let them go to seed, they can spread around the garden. So you may want to harvest those flowers for other uses just to get them out of there before they go to seed, or dead. Make sure you're deadhead before the seeds form. You want to snip the fresh leaves as needed during the entire growing season. The plants can be cut back several times during the season without harming them at all. They may make the plant a little smaller and maybe even not have to be divided as often that way. A few clumps can be potted in late fall as well, and you can keep them indoors in a sunny windowsill, and you can eat the fresh leaves as they grow during the winter or as needed. Now we have cilantro, and you can tell by the technical name, Coriandrum sativum. It may be You may be surprised that cilantro and coriander are the same plant, except cilantro we eat the leaves, coriander it's actually the seeds that we eat. It is a dainty little annual that looks similar to parsley. It has a very quick life cycle. There's several other names out there: Chinese parsley, cilantro is what we know it by, and coriander, which was the seeds. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall and has young leaves that are oval and toothed, while the mature leaves are kind of feathery. The term cilantro actually refers to the foliage, which I just said. The leaves are kind of pungent, combining the flavors of sage and maybe citrus, and then the small pinkish white flowers occur in late or occur in flat umbrella-like clusters at the stem ends. Cilantro is one of those herbs that you either love it or hate it. The people that don't like it, there's a genetic uh, thing that goes on there, and to them it tastes kind of soapy, so they don't like it. As far as uses, the fresh leaves of cilantro are used in many of your Mexican dishes, which is what most of us have had it in, but it also is used in Mediterranean and Chinese dishes as well. It can also be used to flavor sauces and chutneys and curries. And the seed is valued for its spicy flavor, which I talked about earlier, and it's used for breads, gingerbread, and cookies and those types of things. Since the flavor of the leaves is entirely different from that of the seed, they cannot be interchanged in recipes. So just keep that in mind that they do not have the same flavor profile. Cilantro prefers full sun and a rich, well-drained soil. You want to sow the seeds about a ½ inch deep in the spring after all danger of frost is past. The seed germinates quickly. You want to thin the seedlings to about 6 inches apart after that. It's helpful to stake the stems to prevent them from flopping over because there is kind of a flopping plant. If the leaves are to be used, you want to harvest only through the younger ones. And then to harvest the seeds, you wait until the flower actually flowers and fruits, and you can harvest the seeds. And then we're on to deal. It's another annual, goes 24 to 36 inches tall. Again, dill is an annual plant. It has blue-green feathery foliage. It grows again 2 to 4 feet tall and provides a soft, lacy background for some of the smaller herb plants. When in flower, the plant supports graceful umbels of tiny yellow little flowers, kind of a chartreuse color. It's also a nice plant, foliage and texture-wise, to add to annual beds or even perennial beds. The leaves and umbels of dill are a traditional favorite for what most of us think of dill as far as, and that's dill pickles. But they can be used with a wide range of other foods as well. The leaves provide a pleasantly kind of strong seasoning when chopped into garden salads and cottage cheeses, potato salads, meat or fresh dishes, or fish dishes, soups, stews, and sauces. They're all good for all that. You can also add dill seed to breads and omelets, even egg or salad, baked fish, even legume dishes. Dill's flavor profile goes with a lot or a wide range of foods. To harvest the seeds, allow the plant to mature until the seeds ripen to a light brown color. Then the dried blooms can be used in wreaths and garlands or even potpourris. Dill is easy to grow. It's easy to start from seed. You can start directly seeded, or you can start early if you like. It doesn't transplant well, so make sure you start it into individual containers. You start it early. I like to just seed it directly where I want it to grow. Sunny, well-drained location. You want to thin the seedlings to maybe 8 to 10 inches apart. And if you love dill like I do, you want to have successive plantings, starting from April through July. You can sow towards the end of July, and you'll still get dill by the time fall is or frost is coming along. Dill will self-sow as well. So if you like it in the spot it's in, just go ahead and let it seed there, and then you'll have little seedlings coming up in that spot too. And you can also scatter them in other beds if you'd like to try them moving around in the garden. Next up, we have mint. It is a perennial, upright plant. It can reach about 2 feet in height. Peppermint has the dark green leaves and a reddish stem, and the peppermint flowers have a lavender shade. Spearmint is a lighter green in color with the sharply pointed leaves, and the spearmint flowers are pink. Both emit a characteristic warm, spicy scent when bruised or crushed. Fresh mint is added to salads and summer beverages, and the dried leaves make an aromatic tea that is sometimes considered to be an aid to digestion. Spearmint has a slightly milder flavor than peppermint. It's probably actually my favorite, probably. The dried leaves can also be added to potpourris to give an impression of coolness. Mint is easily propagated by divisions of clumps, and true peppermint is actually sterile, cannot be propagated by seed. Plants send out many runners that can be divided and lifted. As a matter of fact, it can be kind of invasive, so be sure wherever you plant the mints that you can keep it under control. You can even separate it, put it in its own pot, and maybe hope that it'll stay in a pot and not go out into the ground. Lots of ways you can kind of keep it in check. They grow best in moist, partially shaded to sunny locations, and you will space the plants about 2 feet apart. You harvest the leaves as needed or cut the entire stem 1 inch above the ground just before flowering as well. The flavor is not nearly as good after they're flowering, so if it's in full flower and you want fresh mint, cut the plants down, and the new growth you can cut it and use it for mint. Next up is oregano. It's a low-spreading perennial with fuzzy pale green, round, half to 1 inch leaves and erect reddish stems. The flower spike is a knot-like cluster, actually, not even a flower like you would actually think of a flower being. And the roots spread to form a dense clump and can become rampant in the garden. So it's another one of those to keep in check, put it in a place where you can keep it under control. They're used in Italian and Mexican main courses. They're used in sauces, cocktails, dips, cheeses, and cheese and egg dishes. I'm sorry, eggplant, poultry, and many vegetables. It's also known as the pizza herb in the United States. So most of us, when we smell oregano, we think of pizza because it's used so much in pizzas in this country. Then we have parsley. It is a biennial plant. The first year it produces a rosette of leaves, and in the second year it sends up a flower stalk that produces seed, then it dies. There's two types. There's curled and Italian. The curled parsley has a crisp, tightly curled foliage, and the Italian parsley has broad, flat leaves and a stronger flavor. These are actually flavor enhancers, so they're used in lots of dishes to enhance the flavor of the dish. The curled type is mainly used as a plate garnish. The Italian type is used for soups, stews, vegetables, salads, meats, poultry. If you ever watch some of the networks cooking shows, those types of things, they put parsley in just about every savory dish that they actually do. You want to plant the seeds in early spring in medium rich soil in full sun. The parts that can be harvested as soon as the plants reach 6 inches tall. Then you want to harvest the outer leaves and let the inner leaves develop, and then you can keep harvesting those outer leaves and let the plant keep growing. Next up, we have rosemary. It is an evergreen shrub that reaches a height of about 5 to 6 feet tall. If you're growing in a warm climate where you can leave it outside, it's in a pot, it'll still do that, but you're going to have to bring it in and out. The leaves are needle-like, leathery, and dark green with a gray undersurface. The flowers appear in spring and are lavender blue. There's new varieties out there that's even a real blue that has a characteristic balsamic smell. I can hardly walk by a plant of rosemary without rubbing and smelling it. As far as uses, it makes a good container grown plant and is commonly trained into topiaries. It's used as an antiseptic and it is astringent. And it also is included in cosmetics for its beneficial effect on hair and skin as well. It does add a subtle, rich flavor to chicken, beef, pork, lamb, sauces, stuffings, soups, and breads. If you like the flavor of rosemary, you can put it in just about any savory dish, maybe even in maybe a sweet dish in a small amount. Rosemary, it's best to start with plants purchased from the garden center just because it takes so long, although they are easy to germinate at home. There's upright plants that takes a bit less space, but there also are sprawling and prostrate plants, which you can actually grow and hang in baskets if you like. They grow best in a well-drained, sunny area, and you want to keep the soil moist but not wet. And you want to fertilize very little because rosemary is not a heavy feeder like the other herbs. Then we have sage. It is a shrubby perennial of the mint family, Lemonaceae. It bears oblong, woolly, wrinkled gray-green leaves, and it grows to a height of about 2 feet. Lilac blue flowers are produced on terminal spikes, and it's flavored for its gray foliage and pungent scent. This is another one of those nice little perennial plant for your perennial garden. It's really pretty when it's in flower. This one is well known as an ingredient in stuffings for poultry, duck, turkeys, and goose. We think of it a lot here as being in our stuffings for Thanksgiving around this part of the country, and also in sausage. Um, it is, speaking of sausage, good in with pork and fish as well, and actually soups and salads too. The powdered leaves are rubbed on the outside of ham and pork to impart a piquant flavor as well. Sage can be started from seeds, cuttings, or crown divisions. It's easier to start with established plants. If you've got established plant, you can just do a crown division. You want to space the plants about 18 to 24 inches apart and harvest the leaves before the plants bloom. The flavor is not nearly as good in the leaves after they bloom. Or you can cut the stems to 6 to 8 inches long and you can hang them to dry as well. Our next herb is fennel. It has a licorice flavored seed and foliage. Florence fennel is an annual. Regular fennel, which was what's pictured, is a perennial. These are used in salads and sauces for seafood. Seeds are used in breads. You can harvest the foliage anytime, seed just after they ripen. And the foliage is best used fresh. Seed can be dried and stored as well. It is difficult to transplant. It has a taproot, so make sure you put it where you want it or seed it where you want it. We have French tarragon. This is a perennial. It's about 2 feet tall. Fresh foliage is used to flavor meats and sauces and vinegars. It's really good on carrots out here. It's propagated by cuttings. True French tarragon does not produce viable seeds. So if someone tries to sell you tarragon seeds, it's not the true French type. You want to harvest the foliage as needed, and you can use it fresh. It also makes a good vinegar if you put it in vinegar and make a tarragon vinegar. Lemon, lemon verbena is next. This is a tender perennial, gets about 3 feet tall. It is good. The foliage is used to substitute for lemons in recipes. It's propagated by seed or root division. It's not hardy for us here, so it's nice to grow in a container and you can take it in and overwinter it. Foliage can be harvested before flowering. Again, this is another one of those. You want to harvest the foliage before it starts flowering. The flavor goes downhill after that. It can also be dried. Chamomile is another perennial. It gets about 14 inches tall, and you can see those nice little daisy type flowers. It has an apple scent. The blooms are used in teas. It's propagated with seed or divisions in the spring. And you harvest those flowers in mid-June, and you'll dry those and you'll store those, and then you can make teas with it. And also by harvesting those flowers, you'll maintain your vigor of your plant by not allowing it to go to seed, and that way you'll get a larger plant for next year. It does have kind of a ground cover effect once it's established. Sweet marjoram, you can see oreganum. It is in the oregano family. Foliage is used to flavor meats, vegetables, tomato dishes, and soups and stews. It's used pretty much the same as oregano. And you want to harvest when the ball-like tips appear at the end of the stems. This is one of those that marjoram is better flavored if you allow those little flower buds start to form. That's the little balls at the tip of the stems, and you'll cut those and you'll dry those, and you use those in your dishes. And you can store these dried. Marjoram and oregano is one of those that actually is better dried than it is fresh. You want to cut the plant back to the ground when it flowers, and that'll bloom, and flowers bloom to stimulate new growth. Or you can harvest those balls as it's forming the flower buds, and then you can cut the stems back and get regrowth. Now we're on to lavender, which is also a tender perennial. It's used for fragrance in soaps, shampoos, and sachets, and flower flavoring and sugar. The scent has been medically proven to produce calming, soothing effects, even sedative effects when inhaled, which is why they use the scent in a lot of lotions and things to help people go to sleep. Heavy branch short shrubs tends to drown or rot in our heavy wet clay soils in winter. So what you need to do is raise your bed and add organic matter or something to loosen that soil up where it'll dry quicker and where it won't have wet feet during the winter, and that where that heavy clay soil will rot those roots. We have stevia. This is an annual because it will not overwinter here. It is frost sensitive. It's a tropical plant. It's grown for its calorie-free sweetness of its leaves. The taste is better in cooler weather prior to blooming. Don't make the mistake to try to harvest this in July. It's going to be very bitter. You want to dry the leaves, and you can ground those into powder and use those in dishes for sweetness. Trim off blooms to encourage renewed growth, and usable leaves. And you can also wait into the fall and cut it back in the summer. Wait until the fall as it regrows and the weather's cooling, and then you can harvest those leaves as well. Thyme is a hardy perennial. It's about 12 inches tall. There are over 20 varieties of thyme. It is a low-growing, wiry-stemmed perennial that grows 4 to 8 inches tall. The stems are stiff and woody, and the leaves are small, oval, and gray-green. A lot of times people will actually just cook the whole stem and then take the stem out because the leaves will actually fall off in a dish. It's tiny, narrow leaves, and they are very aromatic. It's one of those really great smelling herbs, and it's really nice in a lot of different dishes. It is grown as an edging plant or ground cover. It's good for a rock garden. Thyme also contains thymol, which is a disinfectant that is effective against bacteria and fungi. It was made popular as a remedy for relieving coughs during ancient times. And then it has a warm clove-like flavor that goes well with poultry, fish, stuffing, stews, soups, tomatoes, eggplant, cheese, eggs, rice, breads, about anything you like thyme. If you like thyme, you can put it on just about anything. And lemon thyme is also a very popular variety. If you have any questions, you can call the Washington County Extension Office. I'll be here to answer any questions on herbs and also any other gardening questions. Happy gardening.